Welcome back, everybody, to Waadaplaya Concussion Sub Series. 2023 is off to a busy start. Everybody's coming back from vacations, time offs. So I'm sure all of you are starting to get back into the groove. So are we. We are kicking off the year in a fantastic style. So we had a very special guest on the show. Firstly, Sharadha, welcome back on the show. And then we have today Estelle Vasudevan. She is Papare editorial manager, and she also does Sri Lanka cricket coverage on Jared Kimber's 99.94 podcast. Estelle, welcome. We are very excited to have you on our show.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
So there's a lot to talk about. Today's show will be focused on understanding Sri Lankan cricket and some of the nuances. We will also, Estelle, have a special section of quiz. We will have 6 questions at the end of it. We'll try a super over for you. We'll see how much you will score in that as well. So,
Yeah, I told you I'm a bit nervous about that, but let's go.
awesome, great. So we always start with everybody who joins our show to understand the association of cricket for them and what is the genesis to help understand the story behind why cricket. Where did your association with cricket start? And were you always a cricket buff, or is it by accident? Is it by choice, by design? So it'll be fantastic for us to understand where did your journey to cricket
I
start?
will say that I grew up just with sports around me all the time. Both my parents watched a lot of sport while we were growing up. So, I mean, not just cricket, but we had posters of Pete Sampras, Michael Johnson, Alan Donald on our walls growing up. So, just their love for sport in general, that kind of, got us into sport. And of course, Sri Lanka loves its cricket, right? And I was born in the late 80s, so 1989, and then 95, 96, Sri Lanka won the World Cup. So just when I was entering and entering the age where I would be involved in sport, Sri Lanka was crazy over cricket. So that seemed like, the inevitable path. But yeah, I still follow a lot of other sports as well. It's just that career-wise, cricket seems to be the most productive in Sri Lanka at the moment. But yeah, that's how it all starts. I mean, I write, I do a bit of video for the Papare.com as well. And as you mentioned, I podcast with the 99.94 network, where me and Mark Machado, we talk about Sri Lanka cricket in general, multifaceted role.
Yeah, I've been following Estelle's work actually. So, Estelle, I've been, really fond of your commentary, especially when India to Sri Lanka. So, she was the clear, standout. So, lovely catching up with you. Hoping to learn a lot more about Sri Lankan cricket from you.
Awesome. So one other question which I've always had is the men's cricket in Sri Lanka, of course, picked up the momentum in 1996, as you mentioned, after the World Cup. But where did the love for cricket, for women's cricket start, right? What was the pinnacle moving point for that? And second, from a domestic structure point of view, where do you see Sri Lankan cricket evolving, both for men's and women's cricket? Because fantastic last year, where Asia Cup champions, but then had a bump in the road in the T20 World Cup for men's cricket. And then for women's cricket, I was trying to look at some of the stats before the show, and I see there are one-day internationals and there are T20 internationals, but there are no test matches in women's cricket. So it would be very interested to hear how the setup of Sri Lanka is, and where do you see the journey, and what do you think should people expect in Sri Lanka cricket in the next 5 to 10 years time?
It's very different, the men's and the women's game. For the men, Sri Lanka does have quite a competitive school structure, and schools cricket is quite popular. I mean, this is kind of the season, January to April is kind of the season where cricket is played around the country in the schools. We have this thing called a big match, which is a traditional game between two schools which have been played, for ages. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things that has driven that popularity in schools cricket in Sri Lanka. On the women's side, a lot of women always loved cricket or followed cricket, particularly after that 96 World Cup win, right? Because, I mean, particularly people who were kids at that point obviously got into the game. But I would say that 2013 World Cup in India, where Sri Lanka was able to beat both India and England for the first time, was really the moment when a lot of cricket fans kind of realized that, look, we have a women's team. I mean, even personally, I think I must have been aware that there was a women's team, but that was the tournament. That was the moment Sri Lanka beat England was the one where you kind of thought, oh, this isn't just people playing for fun. They're out there, they're playing World Cups, they're on the big stage. So I think that was the moment that I think a lot of people got into women's cricket. In terms of the structure, so I mentioned the men's side, schools cricket is big, but the domestic structure is not great. Sri Lanka is, of course, very, very much smaller than India, as you know. And yet we have way too many domestic clubs. We have, I think, 26 clubs that play first class cricket, which in the context of population of Sri Lanka kind of seems to dilute the quality of competition. So that is something that Sri Lanka has been struggling with for the past decade or so. The quality of the competition is not great. So that in turn obviously affects the international scene and players coming into the international scene. In terms of the women, it's quite different because you don't have private clubs per se, or you don't have many private clubs per se that have cricket for women. Basically what happens is there are very few schools that play leather ball cricket. And then when it comes to the club scene, it's more or less the forces. So the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army have cricket clubs of their own. They recruit players straight from school, and then they play cricket for those teams because those forces are able to offer players compensation, financial compensation. Whereas, to my knowledge, there are 3 private clubs in the women's arena at the top division anyway. That's Coles Cricket Club, Chilau Marians, and Sinigama CC, which cannot pay a salary to players. So basically, lots of players are left with no option but to join the forces, and to do that, you have to join pretty early. So I don't think they hire girls over the age of 25. That's kind of the scene there. So you do see a lot of players from the forces dominating Division 1 cricket. If you look at the Sri Lankan team, I think apart from Athapattu and Gunaratna, everybody else plays for one of the forces. Athapattu also played for the forces before. That's kind of the scene. The two are going in very different directions, the men's and women's games. I think the women are still very much in that development stage where they haven't been getting enough cricket over the past few years. Since that 2013 World Cup, which should have been kind of the moment which sparked greater things for Sri Lanka, didn't turn out that way. And I'm not sure how much you guys had heard about it, but during 2020, Sri Lanka didn't play any international cricket. So things like that have really affected the growth of the team. I think if you look at the last 12 months, they have played a lot more cricket domestically and internationally. So you're seeing a few more players kind of shine on the international scene. I would say if Sri Lanka cricket can continue to develop, and we've got a T10 competition coming up in June, hopefully that brings an influx of finances. It helps the players, and we can see a few more of those players grow into their talent, and maybe Sri Lanka can do better internationally. But I think there's a very, very long way to go structurally in the women's game. For the men, I think the structure is there. It's just about fine-tuning things and setting goals and assessing where you want to be in the next few years. So kind of very different timelines they are on currently. But I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm hopeful that we'll see greater things from both teams in the coming years.
Awesome. Great to understand. And I was not aware about the armed forces playing such a big role in women's cricket. It's pretty important aspect of it. It also helps from day job, right? People do play cricket, both men's and cricket, but at the end of the day, everybody has bills to pay. So it also helps having a job per se in addition to playing the game. So I think that's a fantastic initiative.
Great to learn about the domestic structure. So Estelle, I just want to ask you about the women's cricket team in particular. So we all know about Chamari Athapattu, but in the Asia Cup and even in the last, since 2021, there have been a few other cricketers who have been, doing really well, stepping up whenever Chamari hasn't performed. Someone like Asini Pereira, Inoka Ranavira bowling very tight spells, someone like a young cricketer like a Kavisha Dilhari coming up. With all these cricketers coming up, do you think this is kind of a transition phase after, Sashikala Srivardhane, one of the, greatest cricketers ever, having left? So where do you see these youngsters, especially with competitions like the women's IPL just being announced, the women's Big Bash League? Do you think they will be able to, play all these franchise tournaments in the upcoming years, and that would help Sri Lankan
I
cricket?
think you mentioned a few of the youngsters. Harshita Samravikrama is another one. We are seeing we are seeing what they're capable of because during the last year they've gotten a lot more fixtures. It's really a pity when you look at things, players like Ranavira who are in their late 30s, what
Correct.
they could have achieved if they did have the type of backing and the resources that maybe the men's team gets, or to a degree of at least what the men's team gets. Uh, I think we could have seen a lot more from players like that. In terms of franchise leagues, I think Inoka Ranavira has been consistently good in international cricket. But
Yes.
like I said, the problem is Sri Lanka don't play a lot. So the opportunities for them to show or to build some consistency, to build some momentum, put together a few good performances it's tough for them because they don't play often. I mean, even this year, Bangladesh was supposed to tour in January, and that tour has been postponed. Thanks to the Women's Championship, it will happen. But if you're playing, 3 series a year or 2 series a year, that's not really helping your young players develop, right? And particularly when the domestic setup isn't that great either. So that's one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the biggest reasons why we haven't seen more players kind of make headlines around the world. But coming back to like the franchise leagues, I think Inoka Ranavira would be a fantastic pick for the IPL.
Yeah.
Because she has been phenomenal, I think, over the last 2 years.
I think she has been very consistent, very accurate.
Exactly.
And yeah, she was, I think, the second highest wicket taker in the Asia Cup. And
Yeah,
even the
yeah.
Indian team struggled hard to, just convert boundaries in her spin.
Yeah, I think for Sri Lanka, she's been the player who they relied on not only to take the wickets but also to keep the runs down, and she's done that role perfectly, right? I mean, if just looking back during the series when during the ODIs and T20s when India were down, she was definitely someone who the Indians struggle to face, and India is a team that does play a lot more cricket and does play a lot
Spin a lot more.
overseas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they play spin a lot at home as well. So Inoka Ranavira, I think, would be a fantastic pick for any women's IPL team. And another one I would say is Oshidi Ranasinghe, who does offer a bit with the bat. I mean, we haven't seen it at the international stage, but she is very much of a bowling all-rounder. She can bat well as well. So she's another one who might be a bit of a wild card. Obviously, Atapattu, I think a lot of teams will have their eye on if
And she has already set the stage on fire in the Women's T20 Challenge. A lot of my friends are huge fans of Athapattu. They just want to see her in the IPL.
Yeah, I mean, that's the type of player like that you want to watch, right? Like, she's a modern day T20 cricketer, right? Those three I would say would be my top picks. Someone like Kavisha Dilhari I know is quite highly rated around the world, and particularly by people like even Athapattu, Shashikala Sirivardhana. So she might be another one who teams might have an eye on. I think it'll all depend on. It might also depend on availability of other players from other countries. Sri Lanka, they're likely to be available because they play so little. But in England, Australia, those players play a lot more cricket, so that might also come into play. But I'm hopeful that at least 3 players from the Sri Lankan side will get picked for the women's IPL.
Definitely, and with the women's IPL having this model of having 5 foreign players in the playing 11, I think as you said, 3 or 4 players from Sri Lanka are expected to be picked in the draft or drafts as of now. So fingers crossed.
So switching gears a little bit to the current Sri Lanka tour of India. We Indians love having Sri Lanka tour, right? Very often we see the series coming through. Yesterday's game, I personally felt Sri Lanka gifted the game, right? They had the game in hand. So One, what's your thought, especially on T20 cricket evolution in Lanka? And second, I'm also keen to get some thoughts from you about the IPL franchisees versus some of the unsold players like Dashan Sanaka. Shocking that no franchisee went, especially yesterday. He, almost single-handedly won. So, interested to hear about your thoughts on the series, and of course, it's a ODI World Cup year. So, what do you see Sri Lanka preparation going in, and also IPL men's cricket unsold players? Thoughts from you, Estelle?
You're absolutely right, right? That game yesterday was Sri Lanka's for the taking. I think at the toss, if you had told Shanaka you'll be chasing 163, he would have been very happy with that. The batting just has not managed to do much in the last few months. Just after that Asia Cup win, seems like things have gone downhill a little bit. So that's something they definitely want to address. Just thinking about where Sri Lanka was 1.5 years ago, I don't think they would have been able to compete with that Indian team if you think of them back then. So during the last like 18 months, Sri Lanka T20 cricket have come a really long way, I feel. And it's funny because it's not a different batch of players, right? It's the same players. And that's one thing that we always talk about in Sri Lanka, is that the talent is always there. There's no lack of talent. There's never been a lack of talent in Sri Lanka. It's about the finer things that come with that talent that, modern day cricket is not about talent anymore, right? Everybody's talented. That is the base now. So it's about fine-tuning the things after that make you into a team that is competitive. And if you look at this current Sri Lankan team, they've got a lot of impressive players. I mean, I may be biased for saying that, but you look at it, you've got Hasaranga, is obviously world class. Mahesh Deekshana, another, I would say, very underrated, but very valuable asset to Sri Lanka. You've got Chamika Karunaratne, Kusal Mendis, another one who's really come up leaps and bounds in the last year. And you mentioned Dasun Shanaka, right? I was recording a pod with 99.94 just before this, and we were talking about whether he was unlucky not to get picked in the draft, the IPL draft. And I feel like just looking at the teams, he should feel a bit, disappointed he hasn't been picked, because he's made a lot of runs at number 6 and 7 during the last couple of years, and he's done it quite consistently. And he's been able to be, I would say, more explosive than a lot of other batters that we've seen, right? I mean, particularly against India, for whatever reason, he seems to really enjoy batting against those Indian bowlers. But we did see, even against Australia, he played just an unbelievable knock in that final T20. I would understand if he was disappointed about it. I'm sure he is. But I also would say that if you look at the guys who are similar to him, they bowl a lot more. I think that is one area that may have cost him, and it's sad because he's captain, so he gets to choose, right, whether he bowls or not. But he just doesn't seem to use himself enough in games, and I think that's probably cost him a contract with maybe the Delhi Capitals, because he plays, or he's slated to play for Dubai Capitals in the IL T20. I just think that may have been the deciding factor in the end, because in terms of finishing, he seems to be doing the job for Sri Lanka, right?
I hope that next year some injury replacement or something happens and some team picks him, because the talent which Sri Lanka brings is unbelievable, and IPL has to see the talent.
What are your expectations of the women's IPL? How do you think it's going to benefit women's cricket overall?
It's probably going to be a really massive thing for women's cricket, particularly because I know we've had the Big Bash and that's been going on for a couple of years. But just the amount of people that the IPL would reach makes it such a big step, right? And I know there's been a lot of disappointment from Indian fans about why it's taken so long. And I mean, that's the question we all have, right? Why has it taken so long to put this together? Because it seems a no-brainer, right? It's going to make you money. If that's what you're looking at, it's going to make you money. But it's also going to develop your game to a degree where, you're probably not many other teams are going to be able to compete with that in the end, right? You've seen what it's done for cricket in Australia. Obviously, Australia's setup and their structure has been in place for a long time, and that's developed some incredible players. But you have to start somewhere, and just getting that women's IPL off the ground instead of these exhibition games that they were playing for the past couple of years, I think it's going to be tremendous, not just for Indian cricket. It's going to help a lot of players develop their skills as well, a lot of players around the world. And I'm sure, if you look at the men's IPL, in the beginning, you had teams like, countries like England where they were hesitant. They didn't want to be involved with it early on, right? But on the women's side of things, I don't think that's an issue. So you're going to have players from Australia, you're going to have players from England coming in, South Africa, West Indies, hopefully few from Sri Lanka. So it's going to be massive, I think, for them. And not to mention, I think for players from Sri Lanka in particular, from their perspective, financially, it's going to be massive, right? Because like I mentioned to you, there is no substantial financial incentive to play cricket in Sri Lanka as a woman. Obviously, if you're contracted to SLC, you do get paid, but it's nothing near what the men get paid, right? I would expect the IPL to contribute hugely to the growth financially as well. And we've seen this in the past for the men. That kind of money is life changing. And I don't want to focus only on the money, but this is, that's the reality of things, right? A lot of these players, your career isn't going to last much beyond the age of 35 or let's say 40. Making as much as you can during the period where your peak is really important. So I think it's going to have a massive impact. They should have got it. If they had got it going earlier, I think they would have probably had a World Cup by now. But yeah, hopefully in the next couple of years.
Better later than never. So yeah, I have one last question for you, Estelle. Now with the development of women's cricket, a lot more women, people like me have been getting back into the sport as coaches, analysts, trainers. We have a lot of support staff being women. But do you think there are additional challenges that women face off the field, as administrators, journalists, or even commentary? Do you think women have more challenges when compared to men?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They do have a lot more challenges. Just in that, I'm not gonna say that I have all the answers or all the points regarding this. I do feel like a lot of the challenges they face are not even. It's not something that somebody's intentionally doing to you, but it's simple little things. Okay, so for example, the first thing I do when I go for a cricket coverage in Sri Lanka is I ask the media manager whether there's a ladies' washroom open. Because sometimes they just don't remember to do that, because there aren't that many women coming into the press box, right? And in the early days, I've had experiences where they had to go and unlock a washroom for me because it hadn't been prepared. They were not prepared for a woman to come. So something like that, it's not intentional. They're not trying to discourage women from coming.
Correct.
But it's an oversight because it's not something they think of, right? And similarly, I think there are a lot of issues like that happen. The default is men, and women are like the specialty thing that they have to now do something additional to fix. So I think those are a lot of the challenges are related to that kind of thing. If we do manage to get a lot more women involved in, I can only speak from a media perspective, but if we do manage to get a lot more women in the media box consistently, I think a lot of those challenges will get easier. Hopefully that happens the next couple of years. I know in India it's better than Sri Lanka, and in broadcast media it's much better than written media. I think at the T20 World Cup there were probably less than 10 women who were in written media at the World Cup. So that's not a good thing, right? In 2022, you'd expect a lot more women to be involved. On the broadcast side, the numbers are much better because they are on screen, right? And a lot of organizations want to put women on screen. But in these other positions behind the scenes, it seems a lot tougher. So hopefully that changes. But yeah, there are definitely challenges. I think a lot bigger challenges than what men face. I think that's a lot to do with the fact that women are just easing into the profession properly now, or those professions now. So I'm hopeful that things change. Hopefully there will be a lot more women who come in, and I think that's why it's important to be visible, even if I'm not particularly comfortable being on camera at all. But I understand that it's important to be out there because that might encourage somebody who is actually good at, presenting or whatever, to get out there. That hopefully gets more numbers, more people, more women in my profession, and then things will ease up, I think.
You're absolutely right. I think the broadcasting, there is much more traction as compared to the written media or in the press box. We had Melinda Farrell join us last year as well on our show, and she was talking about how naturally everybody thinks it's a men's game, and people ask questions when, women reporters are showing up to the press box saying, "Oh, you're here for cricket," kind of a statement.
Yeah, actually, Melinda is the one who made that point to me that, broadcast, there are numbers, but written media, there are very few. Because, I met her while I was covering one of the games, and we were talking about it, and she was saying about, because she'd been in a few more cities than I had, and she's telling me about, the number of women, that there weren't that many women. Which is disappointing at this. I think in 2022 it's disappointing because you would expect, at least from countries like England and Australia, that you'd have a far greater number of women coming in, but it wasn't the case. But yeah, Melinda is another one, I think, who I think is probably bringing a lot of people into the profession because she's out there and she's doing really good work. She's somebody I look up to. So hopefully, more people are inspired and get into the profession that way too.
100%. I think you made a great point earlier that, even though you might feel that I'm not comfortable on camera, but by you coming in, you're probably inspiring somebody who is looking forward to do the same thing. So thanks for making time for that. Awesome. So it's been fascinating chat. So we can go on, but we do have to switch to the super over quiz for Estelle. So let's see how she does. We have 6 questions for you. Who was the first Sri Lankan batsman to score 100 in each innings of a test?
Oh God, you guys, I'm terrible at this. I'm going to get it wrong, okay? Is it Brendan Kurupu?
One more try.
Dilip Mendes? I don't know.
That's it. It is Dilip Mendes.
Oh, correct. Okay.
Yes.
Actually, that was my first guess, but I changed my mind. Okay.
He scored 105 in each innings versus India in Madras in 1982 and 83, by the way. Okay, next question. Who holds the record for most runs in ODI for women? This should be easy. Full toss.
It's not easy. I'm terrible at these things. Okay, is it Belinda Clark?
One more try.
Gosh, I told you guys I'm terrible. Give me a hint. What country?
He recently retired. Last year she retired.
I think if
Mithali Raj.
Yeah, it will be too easy for you. Yeah.
That is Mithali with 7,000.
Oh, I love Mithali Raj.
Yeah. Another full toss. Who holds the record for most runs in an ODI women for Sri Lanka?
Oh God, Chamari Atapattu, right?
That's it.
Oh yeah.
That's it. And we were looking at the stats before the show. Chamari Atapattu's record is unbelievable in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I know.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Next question number 4. Who holds the record for most hundreds in ODI women?
Meg Lanning.
That's it. Brilliant, Meg. She's fantastic too. So on that, though, one question I do want to ask with T20 World Cup year, keep Australia aside. I know everybody goes to Australia as favorites, but who else outside of Australia do you think has a realistic chance, and where will Sri Lanka end in the T20 World Cup this year?
Yeah, I think outside Australia, it's got to be India, right? I think They are the only team who has consistently come close to beating Australia over the last couple of years. So they've got to be the number 2 side in that tournament. Sri Lanka, I think, would be happy to get a couple of wins under their belts. It's tough to imagine them going past any of those top teams. But of course, the thing is, when you have a player like Atapattu, it just takes like one of her crazy innings to kind of put them in the fray, particularly in T20 cricket. So I'm just hopeful that they put on a good performance, because they seem to lose badly in these games. So if they can be competitive, I think they should be satisfied with that.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's get back to our super over after a short break. So 5th question, who holds the record for most fifers in ODI for women?
I have no clue, but I'm going to say Julan Goswami.
Maybe
No.
go a little towards the islands as a clue.
Oh. It's not, is it? It's not Hay. No, it's not.
Close, in the same region you are, but think of more names
Oh
in that
God.
region. She's
I'm
a
not
spinner.
getting it.
Another clue, she's a spinner.
Anisa Mohammed.
That's it. Anisa
Yes.
Mohammed, she is. She had best of 7 for 14 and she did 6 times 5 fours in one day international. All right, last ball. It's a full toss for sure. Who holds the record for most runs in Test cricket for Sri Lanka?
Yeah, Kumar Sangakkara.
Excellent.
That's the only one I knew. Okay, that's the only one I knew. I guessed everything else.
Brilliant. 12,400 runs. Outstanding cricketer. Outstanding cricketer. Excellent. Estelle, this was fantastic. Thank you very much for making time. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot, and I'm sure folks who are watching will like the stories you brought in on Sri Lanka cricket. Sharadha, thanks for making time. And Estelle, hopefully people will see this and a lot of women will get inspired with the stories you brought in. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for watching, and Happy New Year. And we will see you hopefully later after T20 World Cup. We'll try to bring you back in for another quiz show maybe.
Thanks, guys. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Sharadha. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you so much, Estelle.